My name is Cora Jensen. I'm 35 years old, and until recently, my life was a quiet composition of small, predictable pleasures. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon, a place where the persistent soft rain feels less like an inconvenience and more like a city sighing contentedly. For 12 years, I worked as an archivist for the County Historical Society, a job that suited my temperament. I found a deep, abiding peace in the hushed halls, in the careful handling of brittle documents and faded photographs, each one a whisper from a life already lived. My world was one of order, of catalogued histories, and the gentle scent of old paper. This quiet existence was, in many ways, a fortress I had built for myself. Growing up in the suburbs of Portland, in a neat little house with a rose garden my mother fussed over, I learned early on that my role in the family was to be the steady, unremarkable one. My sister, Serafina, 2 years my junior, was the sun around which our family orbited. She was vibrant, artistic, and perpetually on the cusp of a brilliant breakthrough that never quite materialized. When Serafina wanted to pursue painting, my parents converted the spare room into a studio for her. When she decided she was meant to be a musician, a brand new cello appeared for her birthday. When I earned a full academic scholarship to the University of Washington, the response was a pleased but distracted, "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. It will save us so much money." Their love for me was a given, a foundational fact like the floorboards of our house, always there, but rarely noticed. Their love for Serafina was the art on the walls, the music in the air, a constant, dazzling performance. I never begrudged Serafina her light. She was, in her own way, a kind person. But I did ache for a sliver of that focused, unconditional support. Instead, I learned to be self-reliant. I worked my way through college, supplementing my scholarship with part-time jobs, and graduated with a mountain of student loan debt for my living expenses. I found my own apartment, paid my own bills, and built a life that, while modest, was entirely my own. I was proud of that. I had to be. The day my life change began with the familiar drizzle of a Portland Tuesday. On my way home from work, I stopped at a little market on Hawthorne to pick up some bread and a bottle of wine. The lottery jackpot was the talk of the store, a staggering $3.2 million. On a whim I can't explain, perhaps a flicker of rebellion against my own sensible nature, I bought a single ticket, letting the machine pick the numbers. I tucked it into my worn copy of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own and thought no more of it. That night, curled on my sofa with the rain tapping a gentle rhythm against the windowpane, I saw the winning numbers flash across the bottom of the television screen during the late news. A jolt of recognition, faint at first, then insistent, made me sit up. I retrieved the ticket from my book, my hands trembling slightly. I flattened it on the coffee table, my breath catching in my throat. The first number matched, then the second. By the third, my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth. They all matched. 6 numbers, printed in neat, impersonal ink, had just rewritten the entire story of my life. I sat in absolute silence for what felt like an hour, the world outside my window muted and distant. I checked the numbers online, then on the official lottery app, then back on the television station's website. The result was the same. A single winning ticket had been sold at a market on Hawthorne Boulevard. My first call was to my best friend, Layla. She arrived in 20 minutes, her face etched with worry. I didn't speak. I simply pointed to the ticket on the table. She picked it up, her eyes scanning between it and the numbers on her phone. "No," she whispered, sinking onto the sofa beside me. "Oh, Cora. No way. Is this real?" "I think so," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "What do I do now?" That night, we didn't sleep. We talked in hushed, awe-filled tones about the possibilities. Paying off my student loans, the single greatest weight on my adult life, was the first thought. Buying a small house, a craftsman bungalow with a porch and a garden, was the second. Traveling. starting a small foundation for archival preservation. The dreams, once small and carefully managed, suddenly had space to breathe, to expand. For the first time, my future felt not like a path to be trudged, but a horizon to be explored. And in my quiet, hopeful heart, I allowed myself a foolish thought. Maybe now they'll finally see me. The Lottery Commission office was a sterile, bureaucratic place that felt utterly at odds with the miracle it represented. After they verified my ticket, a kind, professional woman named Mrs. Petrova walked me through the process. I opted for the lump sum payment, which, after state and federal taxes, would be just over $1.8 million. A life-altering sum. A word of advice, Mrs. Petrova said as she handed me a folder of paperwork and a large, ceremonial check for a photo op. Sudden wealth can be complicated. Be very careful who you tell and how you tell them. Take your time. Get a good financial advisor. I posed for the photo, a strained smile on my face, clutching the giant cardboard check that felt both ridiculous and profound. The actual funds wouldn't be transferred for another 2 weeks, but holding that prop, I felt the first real tremor of the earthquake that was coming. I knew I had to tell my family. Despite the years of quiet hurt, they were still my family. I wanted to share my joy with them, to offer them a piece of my good fortune. I just had no idea what a heavy price they would demand for their happiness. I decided to tell them during our customary family dinner the following Sunday. I drove to my parents' house in Beaverton, the ceremonial check, a colorful, worthless piece of cardboard, tucked away in a portfolio on the passenger seat. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach, a familiar childhood feeling of wanting so desperately to please them. As I helped my mother set the table, she commented on my mood. "You seem bright today, Cora. Did you finally get that grant you applied for at work?" "Something like that," I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. "It's good news. I'll tell you all when Serafina gets here." Serafina arrived, as usual, a whirlwind of apologies for her lateness and a dramatic story about a near disaster in her latest business venture, an artisanal, small-batch candle company she ran out of her garage. Once we were all seated around the familiar oak table, I took a deep breath. "I have something to tell you all," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "Something incredible happened this week. I won the lottery." My father chuckled. "How much, Cora?" $50. "No, Dad." I looked around the table at their expectant faces. "The Powerball jackpot. It's $3.2 million. The silence was a vacuum, sucking all the air from the room. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. Serafina's eyes widened, her mouth falling open. Then, the dam of their disbelief broke, and a flood of excited chatter filled the space. My mother hugged me, a rare and slightly awkward gesture. My father clapped me on the shoulder, his face flushed with excitement. "My daughter, the millionaire," he boomed. "I can't believe it!" For a fleeting moment, I felt the warmth I had been craving. It was a pure, uncomplicated joy. But it lasted less than a minute. "Oh, this is perfect timing," my mother exclaimed, turning to my sister. "Serafina, this is the answer to our prayers." My heart sank. Serafina, to her credit, looked slightly embarrassed. "Mom, don't be silly," my father said, waving a dismissive hand. "This is a blessing for the whole family. Cora, your sister was just telling us how much trouble she's in. That big order for the boutique downtown fell through, and now she's stuck with all this inventory and the loan for the new wax melter is due. It's about $60,000, all told," my mother supplied, as if she were presenting a grocery list. "With this money, you can clear her debt and give her a real infusion of capital to get the business on solid ground." I sat there, my half-eaten dinner growing cold, as the conversation swirled around me, a conversation in which I was a subject, but not a participant. My incredible, life-altering news had been instantly reframed as a solution to Serafina's latest financial crisis. They hadn't asked how I felt. They hadn't asked what I planned to do. They had simply seen a resource and allocated it. I haven't even received the money yet, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice even. There's a process. I need to meet with a financial advisor and make a plan. What's the plan? My father said with a shrug. You help your sister. You put the rest in the bank. Family first. Family first, my mother echoed, nodding sagely. We've always taught you girls to look out for each other. The hypocrisy was a bitter taste in my mouth. I remembered being 17, my old car breaking down, and my parents telling me they couldn't afford to help with repairs because Serafina needed orthodontia. I remembered my own small ventures, freelance grant writing, selling vintage books online, which they dismissed as little hobbies while they poured thousands into Serafina's ever-changing passions. What about my student loans? I asked, my voice a little louder than I intended. What about the fact that I've wanted to buy a home of my own for years? Don't I get to secure my own future first? My mother's face hardened into a familiar look of disappointment. Don't be selfish, Cora. This is more money than you could ever need. Your sister has a real dream. This is her chance. Serafina looked from my face to our parents, a flicker of conflict in her eyes. Maybe we should just celebrate Cora's good news for a minute, she suggested weakly. We are celebrating, my father insisted. We're celebrating how this family is going to be taken care of, thanks to Cora's luck. The rest of the dinner was a blur of passive aggression and thinly veiled demands. They discussed how Serafina's business could expand with my winnings, how she could finally rent a proper storefront. I felt myself shrinking, receding into the quiet, compliant role I had played for so many years. But this time, something was different. A cold, hard knot of resentment was forming in my gut, and it felt less like pain and more like resolve. When I finally left, pleading a headache, the air was thick with their disapproval. I drove home through the rainy streets, the windshield wipers keeping a steady, somber rhythm. The joy of my win had been completely eclipsed by the weight of their expectations. Back in the sanctuary of my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and called Layla. They've already spent it, haven't they? She asked, her voice laced with sympathy. They've invested it all in Serafina's candle empire, I said, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. I didn't even get a full 5 minutes of it being my own. So, what are you going to do? I took a deep breath, looking around at the small, safe world I had built for myself. I'm going to do exactly what Mrs. Petrova at the lottery office advised. I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to get a very good financial advisor. And I added silently to myself, I'm going to learn how to build a wall. The days that followed the disastrous family dinner were a masterclass in emotional manipulation. The offensive began the very next morning with a call from my mother at 7 a.m. I was just thinking, she began, her voice syrupy sweet, that we could all go with you to meet the financial advisor. You know, as a family. So we're all on the same page about how best to support Serafina. Mom, I'm not discussing my finances with the entire family, I said, my patience already worn thin. I'm going to handle this myself. Don't be like that, Cora. This is a big responsibility. You need our guidance. I ended the call politely but firmly and spent the rest of my commute to work breathing deeply, trying to ward off the tension headache blooming behind my eyes. At the Historical Society, the quiet stacks of the archives felt like a sanctuary. I lost myself in the task of cataloging a collection of Civil War-era letters, the ink faded, the sentiments timeless. It was a relief to focus on a history that was not my own, but my family was relentless. My phone buzzed constantly with texts. From Serafina, a string of photos of new candle scents she wanted to develop, complete with cost projections. Just so you have an idea of the potential, smiley face, she wrote. From my father, a link to a commercial real estate listing for a storefront in the Pearl District. Great foot traffic for Serafina's shop, the message read. It was as if my refusal to immediately hand over a small fortune was a mere logistical hurdle they were helping me overcome. That week, I had my first meeting with a financial advisor, a sharp, empathetic woman named Anika Sharma. I laid out the entire situation for her, the win, my own financial goals, and the immense pressure from my family. She nodded, a wry smile on her face. The family tax. It's the first and often biggest challenge for my clients with sudden wealth. Let me be clear, Cora. This is your money. Your first and only obligation is to create a plan that ensures your long-term security. Any gifts to family should be a deliberate choice, not an obligation, and they should be structured in a way that doesn't create a cycle of dependency. Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves. We spent 2 hours mapping out a preliminary plan, pay off my student loans and my car loan immediately, establish a multi-tiered investment portfolio, set aside a significant amount for a down payment on a house or to buy one outright, create a charitable foundation for historical preservation grants, a dream I had barely dared to articulate. When I walked out of her office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just money, it was freedom, and I would not let it be squandered. My resolve was immediately put to the test. That evening, I received a calendar invitation via email from my mother. The event title was Family Financial Summit. The location was my parents' house. The attendees were me, my parents, and Serafina. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The audacity of it, to schedule a meeting about my money without even asking me, was breathtaking. I declined the invitation with a one-sentence reply, I will not be attending. As I've said, I will be handling my financial decisions privately. The fallout was instantaneous. My father called, his voice booming with indignation. What is this nonsense, Cora? After all we've done for you, you're treating us like strangers? Your sister is in tears. She thinks you hate her. This has nothing to do with hate, I said, my voice shaking slightly but holding firm. This is about respecting my decisions. It's a selfish decision, he thundered. And we raised you better than that. The next day, they ambushed me. I had just gotten home from work, my arms full of groceries, when I saw their car parked in front of my building. My heart plummeted. They got out as I approached, my mother arranging her face into an expression of deep concern, my father looking stern. We need to talk, he said, blocking my path to the door. We're talking right now, I replied, shifting the grocery bag. And I'm not changing my mind. Let us come up, my mother pleaded. We can't discuss this on the sidewalk. Reluctantly, I let them into my small apartment. It felt like an invasion. They stood in the middle of my living room, dwarfing the space with their disapproval. Serafina was not with them, which was both a relief and a sign that they were deploying a new tactic, the United Parental Front. We've been very patient with you, Cora, my father began, his tone that of a disappointed CEO. But this has gone on long enough. It's time to be a part of this family and do the right thing. The right thing, I repeated, setting my groceries on the counter. And the right thing, in your mind, is for me to pay off Serafina's debts from her failed business. It's not a failed business, my mother snapped. It's a fledgling one that needs capital. The kind of capital you now have in abundance. And what about the capital I need? I asked, the years of suppressed resentment finally bubbling to the surface. What about the fact that I've been living paycheck to paycheck for 12 years, carefully budgeting every dollar to make my student loan payments? Where was the family-first attitude when I needed a cosigner for my first car loan? You said your credit was tied up in a loan for Serafina's trip to Italy to study art. Do you even remember that? My mother flushed. That's not the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. My voice rose, raw with a pain I had held in for decades. It has always been the same thing. Serafina's wants are needs, and my needs are inconveniences. For once, something is mine. And I will not feel guilty for wanting to keep it. The argument raged for nearly an hour. They accused me of being ungrateful, selfish, cold-hearted. They claimed I was tearing the family apart. Through it all, I clung to the words of my financial advisor. This is your money. This is your choice. Finally, exhausted and emotionally raw, I stood up. I think you need to leave, I said, my voice trembling but resolute. My father stared at me, his face a mask of cold fury. "If you turn your back on your sister, you're turning your back on this family," he said, his words a clear threat. "If your love and acceptance are contingent on a $60,000 payment, then it's not a family I want to be a part of," I retorted, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. After they left, slamming the door behind them, I sank onto my sofa and cried. I cried for the little girl who just wanted her drawing to be put on the fridge. I cried for the teenager who worked nights to pay for her own school supplies. I cried for the woman who, even in the midst of the greatest fortune of her life, was being made to feel small and selfish. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place, a steely, unfamiliar calm. I had stood in the eye of their emotional hurricane, and I had not broken. The next morning, I called Layla. "Can I stay with you for a few days?" I asked. "I need to get out of my apartment. I have a horrible feeling they'll just show up again." "My guest room is always ready for you," she said without hesitation. "Come over whenever you're ready." As I packed a small overnight bag, I noticed the spare key to my apartment was missing from the small dish by the door where I kept it. I frowned, trying to remember when I'd last seen it. Then a cold dread washed over me. I'd given it to my parents 2 years ago when I had the flu, so they could bring me soup. I never asked for it back. They still had a key. The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the drizzly Portland weather. The peace of Layla's sun-filled apartment was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my life. For 3 days, I went to work, came back to her place, and ignored the barrage of calls and texts from my family. I used the time to think, to solidify my plans. I contacted a realtor, arranged to have the locks on my apartment changed, and started looking at small houses in quiet, established neighborhoods, far from my parents' orbit. I felt a sense of forward momentum, of taking control. On the 4th day, a Friday, I had to return to my apartment during my lunch break. I had left a crucial file for a presentation at the Historical Society on my desk. Layla offered to come with me, but I waved her off. "I'll be in and out in 5 minutes," I assured her. What are the chances they'll be there in the middle of a workday? As I walked down the hallway to my apartment, a faint, acrid smell tickled my nose. It smelled like smoke. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I fumbled with my key, the new key the locksmith had given me just yesterday, and pushed the door open. The smell was stronger inside, and I could hear voices. My parents. They were in my living room. My first instinct was to retreat, to call the police. But a wave of white-hot anger propelled me forward. I rounded the corner into the living room and stopped dead. My father and mother stood side by side, their faces grim and righteous. Between them, on my hardwood floor, sat my mother's favorite cast-iron skillet. Inside it, a small, sad fire was turning a large piece of colorful cardboard to blackened ash. They were burning my ceremonial lottery check. My father turned to me, his expression devoid of any warmth. "We decided that if you won't share this blessing with your family," he said, his voice cold as stone, "then no one should have it." My mother nodded in agreement, a look of smug martyrdom on her face. Sometimes, a parent has to do what's best for their child, even if the child can't see it. I stared at the scene, at the smoldering remains of the check, at my parents' faces, so full of misguided conviction. I saw the skillet they had brought from their own home, the lighter lying on my coffee table. I saw the calculated, premeditated nature of the act. They had used their key to let themselves in, with the express purpose of destroying what they believed to be my entire future. The sheer, staggering absurdity of it washed over me. The anger I had felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a profound and chilling clarity. It was as if I was watching a play, a tragicomedy so bizarre it defied belief. And in that moment of detachment, I didn't laugh and I didn't cry. I felt an immense, desolate calm. "How did you get in?" I asked, my voice preternaturally steady. "We still had the key," my father said, as if this were a perfectly reasonable explanation. "We were going to talk to you, to make one last appeal to your better nature. When you refused to answer our calls, We knew we had to intervene. Intervene, I repeated softly. I looked from their faces to the smoldering mess in the skillet. You do realize that's not real, don't you? They exchanged a look of confusion. What are you talking about? My mother demanded. We saw the pictures. You, holding that check. That's a prop, I said, the words falling like pebbles into a deep well. A novelty check for the press photos. The lottery doesn't hand out giant cardboard checks for millions of dollars. That's not how the world works. Their certainty began to falter. A flicker of doubt crossed my father's face. The money, I continued, pulling out my phone, is being transferred electronically, directly into a new bank account that only I have access to. In fact, I said, opening my banking app, it looks like the transfer was completed this morning. I turned the phone around and showed them the screen. The number, with its comma and its string of zeros, glowed in the dim light of my living room. What you just burned was a souvenir. The color drained from my mother's face. My father stared at the phone, then at the skillet, then back at me, his mind clearly struggling to process this new reality. The grand, righteous gesture had been reduced to a pathetic, meaningless act of vandalism. Just then, the apartment door opened and Serafina rushed in, carrying a bag of takeout. She stopped short, her eyes taking in the scene. Me, standing like a statue, our parents, looking utterly deflated, and the skillet of smoldering cardboard. What's going on? She asked, her gaze wide with confusion and alarm. I just came to bring you guys lunch. You said you were just going to wait for Cora to come home to talk. They let themselves into my apartment, I said, my voice still quiet, still eerily calm. And they tried to burn my lottery winnings. Serafina's eyes widened in horror. You did what? She whispered, looking at our parents. I told you not to do anything crazy. We were trying to protect the family, my father blustered, his composure beginning to crumble. No, I said, finally taking a step forward. You were trying to control me. You have always tried to control me, to keep me in my place, to make sure I never outshone Serafina. But you don't get to do that anymore. I looked at all three of them, my family, standing in the middle of my violated home. The years of hurt, of being overlooked and undervalued, coalesced into a single, hard point of resolve. Give me the key, I said to my father. He hesitated, then reluctantly dug it out of his pocket and placed it in my outstretched hand. It felt cold against my skin. All of you need to leave now, I said. It was not a request. Cora, please, my mother began, her voice cracking. We made a terrible mistake. We were just so worried. You were worried you were losing your hold on me, I finished for her. You were worried that for the first time in my life, I wouldn't need anything from you, and I wouldn't give you everything you demanded. And you were right to be worried. I walked to the door and held it open. Leave. Before I call the police and file a report for breaking and entering and destruction of property. They gathered themselves in a stunned, shuffling silence. As Serafina passed me, she paused, her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Cora. I didn't know they were going to do this. But you knew they were here, waiting for me, I said quietly. You've always let them fight your battles for you, Serafina. It's time for that to stop. After the door closed behind them, I stood in the silence of my apartment for a long time. The acrid smell of burnt cardboard hung in the air. I walked over, picked up the skillet, and carried it out to the dumpster behind the building. As I let it fall with a metallic cling, I felt a profound sense of release. They hadn't burned my fortune. They had burned the last vestiges of my hope for their approval. They had set me free. That night, I did not sleep at Layla's. I slept in my own bed, in my own apartment, with the locks newly changed and a security system scheduled for installation. I felt safer than I had in my entire life. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of focused activity. I bought a house, a modest but beautiful 1920s craftsman bungalow in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, with dark wood trim, a wide front porch, and a garden just waiting to be brought back to life. I paid for it in cash. The feeling of signing the papers, of owning my own home outright, was a quiet joy that eclipsed even the initial thrill of the lottery win. I paid off my student loans, a debt that had been a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety in the background of my adult life. Watching the balance drop to zero on the screen was an emotional, cathartic moment. I was truly, completely untethered. I resigned from my job at the Historical Society, giving them 2 months' notice to ensure a smooth transition. My plan, which had been crystallizing since the day I met with my financial advisor, was to start a small, private foundation. The Jensen Archer Foundation. I included my mother's maiden name in a quiet, personal nod to the better parts of my heritage, would provide grants to underfunded local archives and historical societies throughout the Pacific Northwest. It was a way to turn my personal passion into a public good, to use my fortune to protect the quiet histories I held so dear. During this time, I maintained a strict silence with my immediate family. Their attempts to contact me were relentless at first, voicemails oscillating between tearful apologies and angry accusations, emails from my mother detailing the terrible financial strain they were now under after helping Serafina with her debts. I read them not with anger, but with a kind of detached sadness, and then I deleted them. My therapist, another wise investment in my well-being, helped me understand that I was not responsible for their choices or their emotional state. My Aunt Margaret, my father's sister, and a woman of immense common sense, became my one link to that side of my life. Your father is walking around like a thundercloud, and your mother has taken to her bed with a case of the nerves, she told me over coffee one afternoon. They simply cannot comprehend that their grand gesture backfired so spectacularly. And Serafina? I asked, a genuine flicker of concern in my heart. That's the most interesting part, Margaret said, leaning forward. She moved out of your parents' house. Got a job as an assistant manager at a cafe downtown. She told me she was tired of living in the middle of their drama. Said she needed to stand on her own 2 feet. The news surprised me. It was the first truly independent action I could remember Serafina ever taking. Months passed. My new life began to take shape, filled with the peaceful rhythms of purpose. I spent my days working on my foundation, my evenings in my garden, and my weekends exploring the Oregon coast with Layla. The money was a quiet hum of security in the background, but the real wealth was the silence, the absence of guilt, of obligation, of the constant, draining effort of managing my family's expectations. One day, about 8 months after the incident, a letter arrived. It was addressed in Serafina's familiar, looping handwriting. I opened it with a sense of trepidation. Cora, it began. I don't expect you to reply to this, but I needed to write it anyway. I've been in therapy for the past 6 months. I'm trying to understand my part in everything that happened. Not just with the lottery, but with our whole lives. I see now that I lived in a bubble of entitlement that Mom and Dad created for me, and that you were left out in the cold. I never questioned it because it benefited me. That was selfish, and it was wrong. Working at the cafe has been humbling. I pay my own rent. I'm on a strict budget to pay off my debts. For the first time, I feel like an adult. I'm sorry, Cora. For everything. I miss my sister. Maybe someday, you won't be a stranger to me. Serafina. I read the letter 3 times, the paper trembling in my hands. The words were simple, direct, and devoid of the usual drama. They felt real. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't ready. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that the sister I had loved as a child might still be there, underneath all the layers of learned helplessness. 1 year to the day after I bought the winning ticket, I sat on my porch swing, a cup of tea warming my hands. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of lavender and roses. My foundation had just awarded its first round of grants. My life was quiet, full, and my own. I thought about my parents, whom I still had not seen. I had heard through my aunt that my father had postponed his retirement to help pay off the new mortgage they had taken out to cover Serafina's business debts. I felt a pang of sadness for them, for the trap of their own making. Perhaps, in time, a path to some kind of peace could be found. But it would be on my terms, built on a foundation of respect they had yet to learn. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over my small corner of the world, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Serafina. Happy anniversary, I guess. Hope you're doing something wonderful to celebrate. I'm proud of you. I looked at the message, then out at my garden. A year ago, a message like that would have been unimaginable. Healing, I was learning, was not a destination, but a slow, quiet process, like a garden taking root. I typed back a simple reply. Thank you. I am. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. But it was a start. And for now, it was enough. The greatest prize the lottery had given me, I realized, wasn't the money. It was the clarity to see what was truly valuable and the strength to protect it. It was the quiet, unshakable peace of my own self-worth.